Hello, my dear friend. Welcome to tonight's gentle sleep story. My name is Tony, and it is my deepest joy to be here with you tonight. To be the voice that cradles you into rest. If this is your first time joining me, you are so very welcome. Like a traveler finding a warm hearth after a long journey. And if you've been here before, I'm so glad to see you again. Like a friend returning to a familiar place, your presence fills this moment with warmth. And I'm grateful for every breath we share. I know today may have been long. Perhaps it was a day of tasks that stretched endlessly. Thoughts that danced like leaves in a storm. Or a quiet heaviness that settled in your heart. But now, you're here, in this soft, tender space. There's nothing left to do, nothing left to hold. I'm here to guide you, slowly, gently, toward a place of peace. Tonight, we're going to journey through a tale that will guide us through quiet forests and mysterious paths, a place where secrets have been buried for years, and the lines between dreams and reality blur. This story is more than just a simple tale. It is a doorway to a world where we may uncover ancient mysteries and truths long forgotten. So, settle in, find your coziest spot, and let's begin. Before we step into our story, let's take a moment to unwind, to let the day slip away. Like soft whispers carried on the wind, I'll guide you through a gentle relaxation. A soft path to ease your body and mind. There's no hurry, no effort needed, just my voice and your breath, moving together like waves on a peaceful shore. If you've enjoyed these stories, please remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts with us. Your feedback helps us grow and encourages us to continue creating these soothing journeys together. Now, as we breathe in peace and exhale the worries of the day, let's walk together down the path that awaits, a place where the ordinary world fades and the mysterious begins. Part 1. The Quiet Beginning. Kafka Tamura, a boy of just 15, had always felt like an outsider, not in the way that others would laugh or point, but in a way that made him feel out of place in his own skin. Like a small boat adrift in an endless ocean, tossed by currents he could not understand. His father's house was a prison, not built of stone, but of silence, and the weight of words that were never spoken. Kafka was burdened, not by love, but by the curse of his family's history, a history he could never escape. It was with this heavy heart and a longing for freedom that Kafka left. He stepped away from the familiar, the suffocating walls of his home, and embarked on a journey to the unknown. The city he left behind faded slowly, like a memory in the distance. becoming smaller with every step he took. His destination was unclear, a quiet place he had never been, a town by the sea, where time seemed to slow, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. Kafka had no map, no clear plan, but something inside him told him to go, to follow the pull of an invisible thread, to a place where he could begin anew. He was ready to leave behind the shadows of his past and find a space of his own, where his destiny could unfold in its own time. And so, as the bus carried him through the open road, Kafka's heart beat steadily, the sound of his pulse marking the rhythm of his journey. The landscape outside the window blurred, as if he were slipping away from the world he knew and stepping into a story that had yet to be written. He arrived in a small seaside town, a place so quiet it felt like the air itself was breathing in slow motion. The streets were narrow, lined with old buildings that had seen centuries pass, and the sea, endless and calm, stretched before him like a vast, sleeping giant. The hotel where he stayed was modest, with rooms that overlooked the water. The sound of the waves soothing in the distance. The owner, a kind woman, welcomed him with a warmth that felt unfamiliar, as if she had known him for years, as if this place had always been meant for him to find. Kafka felt a strange sense of peace here. The town seemed to hold its secrets close, like a whisper shared only with those who listened carefully. In the quiet of the room, with the gentle ebb and flow of the tide, Kafka let himself rest for the first time in years. The weight on his shoulders, the burden of his past, felt lighter, as if the air in this place was cleansing him. But even as he slept, the questions lingered in his mind, like the soft thrum of a distant drum. What was he really searching for? Was it freedom? Was it answers? Or was it simply a place to belong in the stillness of the night? As the moonlight bathed the room in silver, Kafka dreamed, but the dreams were not like any he had ever known. They were vivid, rich with faces and places he had never seen, but somehow felt as if he had known them forever. And in these dreams, he saw glimpses of a world not quite like his own, a world where time stretched and contracted, where the past and the future swirled together in an endless dance. He saw his father's face, twisted with a strange expression, and heard his mother's voice, whispering words he could not quite understand. The dreams were strange, but they felt like a message, a sign. And when he awoke the next morning, the weight of the world seemed a little lighter. The fog that had surrounded him for so long began to lift. In the quiet of the seaside town, Kafka's journey had only just begun. Part 2, The Encounter. The quiet town by the sea seemed to stretch endlessly, its streets winding like old memories, its buildings stoic, yet full of stories only the wind could tell. Kafka wandered through the town the following day, his footsteps soft against the cobblestones, feeling a strange sense of both familiarity and disconnection. The air smelled of salt and earth, a scent that seemed to pull him deeper into the town, as if the very atmosphere was inviting him to uncover its secrets. He passed by small cafes, each one filled with murmurs and laughter. But there was something about this town that made it feel empty, as though it was waiting for something, or someone, to stir its stillness. Kafka couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the buildings themselves, the trees that lined the narrow streets, were all waiting for him to notice something, to discover what was hidden in the corners of this place. The ocean stretched before him, its waves a constant rhythm, a song that never stopped playing. And in the distance, he noticed something unusual, a small, unmarked path that veered away from the main road, leading toward the cliffs that overlooked the sea. The path looked old, as though it had not been walked in years, yet there was a pull to it, a magnetic force that beckoned him forward. Without fully understanding why, Kafka felt the urge to follow it. He stepped off the main road, his feet moving of their own accord, as if the path itself was guiding him. The air around him seemed to thicken, the familiar sounds of the town growing quieter with every step. Soon he was alone, walking down a narrow, winding trail that curved between trees, the path narrowing further as it led him toward the edge of the cliffs. As he reached the top of the cliff, the view before him took his breath away. The sea stretched endlessly, a vast, shimmering expanse that seemed to hold all the mysteries of the world. And yet, there was something more. At the very edge of the cliffs, almost hidden from view, was a small, dilapidated house, its windows dark, its door slightly ajar. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. And yet, there was something about it that seemed to call out to him. Kafka stepped closer, his footsteps hesitant as he approached the house. The air around him grew still, the silence heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. He pushed the door open slowly, the creak of the hinges sharp in the quiet of the afternoon. Inside, the house was empty, save for the dust and cobwebs that clung to the corners of the room. The furniture was old, weathered by years of neglect, but there was something strangely inviting about it, as if the house had been waiting for him to come, for him to uncover what had been left behind. Kafka wandered through the rooms, each one darker than the last, until he reached a small study in the back of the house. On the desk sat an old book, its pages yellowed with age, its cover worn and faded. The book seemed out of place, as though it had been untouched for years. But something about it called to Kafka. He picked it up carefully, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the cover. As he opened the first page, his eyes scanned the words, but they didn't make sense. The text was written in a language he didn't understand, a script he had never seen before. And yet, as his eyes moved across the page, something stirred inside him, a feeling that he had seen this language before. In his dreams, in the distant corners of his mind. Kafka turned the pages slowly, each one more cryptic than the last, until he reached a page near the end. On this page, in the center, was a symbol, an intricate drawing that seemed to pulse with life, like it was alive, waiting for something. The symbol seemed to call to him, its presence growing stronger the longer he stared at it. He felt a sudden urge to trace the lines with his fingers, to understand it, to unlock its meaning. But before he could move, the door to the study creaked behind him, and a voice, soft and distant, called out, "Are you looking for something?" Kafka spun around, his heart racing in his chest. Standing in the doorway was a figure, a woman, her face shadowed by the light from the hallway. She was tall, her hair dark and flowing, her eyes bright with an intensity that seemed to pierce through him. There was something familiar about her, though he couldn't place it. "Who are you?" Kafka asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm just exploring," he added, unsure of what else to say. The woman smiled faintly, her gaze never leaving him. "You've found what you were meant to find," she said softly. "The book, the symbol, it's all part of the story that was meant for you." Kafka's mind spun. What was she talking about? What did she mean by the story meant for him? He had come here by chance, had followed an impulse. And now everything felt so strange, so out of place. The woman stepped closer, her presence commanding yet gentle. "Don't be afraid," she said, her voice soothing. "You're here because you need to be. Everything that's happened, everything you've experienced, it's all been leading you to this moment." Kafka's heart raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. Who was this woman? What was she talking about? But before he could ask another question, the woman turned and walked slowly toward the door. "You'll understand soon," she said, over her shoulder. "Everything will come together. Just remember, the truth is not always what it seems." With that, she was gone, leaving Kafka alone in the study, with the book in his hands and a mind full of questions. Part 3. The Unraveling. Kafka stood alone in the quiet room, the faintest echo of the woman's voice still lingering in the air. His fingers still hovered over the pages of the book. But his mind, his heart, were elsewhere. Something had shifted within him, a spark of curiosity, a pull that led him deeper into the unknown. The woman's cryptic words replayed in his mind. Everything that's happened, everything you've experienced, it's all been leading you to this moment. What moment? What was she talking about? Kafka felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. But there was also something else, a sense of urgency, as if time was slipping away, and he had to understand it all. Before it was too late, he stepped away from the desk, the book still in his hands, its pages thick with strange symbols and drawings that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Kafka turned the pages slowly, his eyes scanning the script. But each time, the words seemed to slip further from his grasp. It was as if the language itself was alive, shifting and twisting just beyond his understanding. He could feel it, the pull of the story, the pull of the truth hidden between the lines. But it was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. His breath slowed, his pulse steady. Kafka moved toward the window, his eyes drifting out toward the sea. The waves were calm, unbroken. A soft rhythm against the shore. It was peaceful, but the stillness didn't feel like comfort. It felt like silence before the storm, like the world was holding its breath, waiting. As he gazed out, Kafka felt the faintest stirring in his chest, a strange connection. Something between the sea and the strange events in the house. What was it that the woman had meant? What was the story he was meant to uncover? The questions began to weigh on him, filling his mind with 1,000 thoughts. But still, he couldn't grasp the answers. He turned his attention back to the book. The pages were worn, and as he flicked through them once more, a single page caught his eye. It was not filled with the strange symbols like the others, but instead, it contained a drawing, a picture. Kafka stared at the drawing for a long time, his breath catching. It was of a door, etched in fine, intricate detail. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, there was an intense glow, a golden light that seemed to pulse. At the top of the door, a single word was written in a language Kafka didn't understand. But somehow, he could still feel its meaning. It was a word that resonated deep within him, as though he had known it forever. The word seemed to shine, glowing faintly in the dim room. Kafka's fingers hovered over it, but before he could touch it, he felt a sudden shift in the air, a disturbance. The temperature in the room dropped, and the once still air seemed to thrum with energy. A cold wind swept through the house, whistling through the cracks in the walls, and Kafka felt a presence behind him. Without turning around, he knew he was not alone anymore. A voice, soft but insistent, reached his ears. "You're starting to see," it said. The words almost a whisper in the stillness. Kafka's heart skipped. The voice wasn't the woman's, nor was it his own thoughts. It was something else, something ancient, and it echoed deep inside his chest. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the room. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift, and the light flickered, casting strange shapes on the walls. There was nothing there, and yet everything felt alive, pulsing, waiting. "What is this?" Kafka whispered, his voice shaking slightly. "What do you want from me?" The voice came again, closer now, like a soft breeze brushing his ear. "You've opened the door, Kafka. You've crossed the threshold. Now, you must decide whether to step through or turn back. The story is already unfolding, and you are a part of it." Kafka's breath caught. The door and the drawing, the golden light, it was all real. He felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He had to make a choice: step forward or retreat. But where could he go now? What was there to return to? When everything he knew felt like a distant memory, the golden light from the drawing began to pulse, its glow growing stronger. It beckoned him, and as it did, Kafka felt a strange surge of energy, a pull he couldn't resist. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his feet moving of their own accord, toward the edge of the room, toward the book, toward the mystery that lay ahead. And then, in the stillness of the room, everything changed. The world around him seemed to dissolve, the air thickening, the shadows lengthening. It was as if he had crossed into another realm, a place where the boundaries between time and space were blurred, where reality itself bent and shifted. Kafka's heart raced, but somehow he was no longer afraid. Part 4. The Crossing. Kafka took a step forward, the air around him thick with the strange energy that now pulsed through the room. The golden light from the book seemed to glow brighter, and with each passing second, the room itself began to shift, as if the walls and floor were breathing, expanding and contracting like the chest of a sleeping giant. He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing the surface of the book, and as soon as his skin made contact, a sudden, sharp jolt of electricity coursed through him. It was not painful, but it was overwhelming. A flood of sensations, a rush of images, glimpses of places he had never seen, faces he did not recognize, whispers that seemed to float just outside of his hearing. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment Everything went silent. The world around him seemed to blur, as if he were no longer fully in the room, but somewhere between reality and something else, a place where time stretched like a never-ending road, and the line between dreams and waking life had vanished. Kafka blinked, and when his vision cleared, he was no longer standing in the dusty room with the book. Instead, he was outside, standing at the edge of a dense forest, the trees towering above him, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The sky overhead was dark, but not with the usual shadows of night. This darkness was deep, almost infinite, a velvet expanse that seemed to stretch endlessly. The air was heavy, but not with weight. It was more like it held secrets, like the earth itself was whispering to him. He looked around, and his heart beat a little faster as he realized something strange. He wasn't alone. A figure stood just ahead of him, silhouetted against the dark backdrop of the forest. The figure was tall, their features indistinct, but there was a sense of familiarity, as though he had seen this person before, in a dream, or maybe in the very pages of the book. Without speaking, the figure began to move toward him, their steps light and purposeful. Kafka couldn't move, couldn't take his eyes off the figure, as if something deep inside him was waiting for this very moment. The figure stopped just a few feet from him, and for the first time, Kafka noticed that their eyes were glowing softly, like distant stars that had been captured in the night. "I knew you would come," the figure said, their voice soft, but carrying a weight that seemed to resonate in the very air. Kafka's throat tightened. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure smiled, and the smile was kind, but there was an underlying sadness to it, a sorrow that seemed to come from a place beyond time. "I am a part of the story," the figure replied. "Just as you are. We are not so different, you and I. We are both bound by fate, by the threads that tie us to this place." Kafka's heart beat faster. Fati. Threads. What was happening? Was this all just a dream? He reached out, his hand trembling, but the figure held up a hand to stop him. "No, don't touch me," they said gently. "You cannot stay here forever. You are still walking the line between worlds. You have come to learn, but you must not linger." Kafka's confusion deepened, but there was a strange understanding in the figure's words. He didn't fully comprehend it, but he felt it. A pull, a direction that was calling him forward. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Where am I? What is this place?" The figure nodded, a soft sigh escaping their lips. "This place is neither here nor there. They said slowly, "It is the space between the known and the unknown, where the past and future can exist together, where the stories of the world are woven into a single thread. You are at the crossroads, Kafka. You have crossed into the realm of the story." Kafka's mind spun with questions, but the figure raised a hand, silencing him. "You don't need to understand it all yet. All in good time. All in good time. But now, it's time for you to choose." The figure stepped back, gesturing toward the path ahead. A narrow trail that disappeared into the shadows of the trees. "You can follow this path," they said, their voice gentle. "It will lead you to the answers you seek. But it is a path filled with uncertainty. And the truth you uncover may not be what you expect." Kafka's heart pounded in his chest. Should he follow the path? Should he step deeper into this strange world? This place between reality and dreams. He felt the pull, the same pull that had brought him here. The same pull that had guided him through the book, through the house, and now through this dreamlike forest. There was no going back. He knew that much. He glanced once more at the figure, whose eyes seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 untold stories. The figure smiled again, as if reading his thoughts, and nodded toward the path. "Time will tell if you are ready for what lies ahead. But remember, Kafka, the truth is a shadow that always follows you. And no matter where you go, it will always find you." With that, the figure began to fade, the glow in their eyes dimming as they dissolved into the darkness of the trees. Kafka stood there for a moment, the silence wrapping around him, before he took his first step toward the path ahead. Part 5. The path forward. Kafka took a deep breath. The forest before him was quiet, silent, almost. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of things unsaid, full of secrets buried in the earth beneath his feet. He stepped forward, his feet soft against the moss-covered ground, the leaves underfoot muffling his footsteps. With every step, he felt the weight of the world lifting just a little bit more, like an invisible burden slipping off his shoulders. But there was still a pull of force that tugged at his heart and mind, guiding him forward, compelling him to follow the path. He glanced back, but the figure had disappeared completely, leaving no trace in the air, as if they were never really there at all. Kafka's throat tightened as he turned his gaze forward again. There was no turning back now. The path stretched out before him, narrow and winding, disappearing into the thick trees ahead. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, fresh and cool, the scent a constant companion. As he walked deeper into the forest, he noticed the trees seemed to grow taller, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their leaves darker, almost like a canopy shielding him from the sky above. The light that filtered through was dim and green, like sunlight through deep water. And then, in the distance, Kafka saw something, a light, faint at first, but growing brighter as he drew closer. It was soft, like the glow of a lantern, casting shadows that danced and flickered on the forest floor. Curious, he quickened his pace, his heart racing with both excitement and unease. As he approached the source of the light, he saw it, a small clearing in the woods, where the trees parted to reveal an old, weathered stone arch. The arch was surrounded by a strange, glowing mist, the kind that didn't seem to belong in this world. It was as if the very air inside the archway shimmered, like the fabric of reality itself was being stretched, bent in ways he couldn't quite understand. Kafka hesitated, his breath caught in his throat. What was this place? Why did it feel so familiar, and yet so foreign at the same time? A soft, whispering wind blew through the clearing, carrying with it the faint sound of distant music, a melody that seemed to come from nowhere, yet seemed to fill the space around him. It was delicate, soothing, but with an undertone of something deeper, something hidden. Kafka stepped forward, his feet moving almost without thought. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cool stone of the arch. As soon as his skin touched it, a shiver ran up his spine. The air around him vibrated, like the strings of a harp being strummed, resonating deep in his chest. And then, without warning, the mist swirled, and the archway seemed to open, not physically, but in a way that went beyond the senses. The world seemed to split in two, as though he was standing on the threshold of something far greater than himself. Through the mist, he saw a place, but not a place, a world, but not a world. It was like a dream, or a memory, something distant yet close, something beckoning him to step through. The light in the arch flickered, and Kafka felt a choice before him, a moment of decision. He could step through, into the unknown, or he could turn back, the path behind him. The familiar trees and shadows seemed to call to him. Safety, certainty, the known. But the arch, the world on the other side, was calling with a deeper pull, one that resonated through his very soul. He looked around the clearing once more, his heart racing. The air was heavier now, charged with energy, the scent of pine and earth mingling with the faint glow of the mist. Everything seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for him to make his choice. Kafka stepped forward, closer to the arch, his hand still hovering just above the stone. The mist swirled around him, whispering softly, as if urging him to move forward. It wasn't a feeling of fear, but something else, something that felt ancient, a sense that he was about to cross a boundary, to step into a place where rules didn't apply, where the fabric of reality was thinner, fragile. He inhaled slowly, deeply, letting the cool air fill his lungs. And with one final glance back at the dark forest behind him, he stepped through. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the world shifted. Time itself seemed to bend, stretch, and then suddenly, everything was still. Kafka stood in a vast, open space. The air around him was different, clearer, lighter, as though it was filled with the breath of something ancient, something eternal. He felt weightless, as if he were floating on the edge of the world, on the edge of a great discovery. Before him stood a figure, a tall, ethereal shape, their features hidden in shadow. The figure's presence filled the space, but in a way that was not overwhelming, not frightening. It was soothing, like a dream that wrapped itself around him, soft and inviting. "You have crossed over," the figure said, their voice a soft hum, resonating deep within Kafka's chest. "The path you walk is not your own, but the path that leads to the truth." Kafka's heart beat faster. The truth, the very thing he had come searching for. But what was the truth? What had he stepped into? Part 6. The Revelation. Kafka stood before the figure, his mind still reeling from the sudden shift. The feeling of stepping into another world, a place where time and space seemed to lose all meaning. The figure, tall and enigmatic, remained still, its presence calming yet mysterious. Kafka could not make out its features, but there was something deeply familiar about it, as though it was both a part of him and beyond him. The air around them was still, the silence thick with an almost reverent quality. "What is this place?" Kafka's voice trembled slightly, the question rising from a place deep within him. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this space, this feeling, was beyond anything he had imagined. The space seemed endless, like an infinite stretch of both time and memory. The figure took a slow step forward, its movements graceful, almost like a dance. As it moved, the world around them seemed to bend in subtle ways, as though the very fabric of reality was shifting to accommodate its presence. "This is the space between," the figure replied, its voice soft but full of depth. "Between the known and the unknown, between what was and what could be, You've crossed into the place where the stories are born, and where they live long after they have been told. Kafka's heart raced. A strange feeling of both awe and fear swirling within him. He had crossed into a new realm. But now the real question seemed to be, what was he supposed to do here? Why had he been called to this place? And what was it that the figure meant by the stories? What was the story that was being written for him? The figure turned toward him, its eyes still hidden in shadow. But Kafka could feel its gaze, felt the weight of it as it seemed to look deep into his soul. You were always meant to be here, Kafka. It continued from the very beginning. This was the path that you were meant to follow. You have sought the truth for so long, but sometimes the truth cannot be told all at once. It must be lived. Kafka felt a shiver run down his spine. The truth? What truth? The words of the woman. The strange events he had witnessed. Everything seemed to be pulling him in one direction. But what was that direction? What was he truly seeking? The figure's form began to shift, blurring at the edges, like smoke drifting in the wind. And then, in an instant, it was gone, vanishing into the air, leaving Kafka standing alone in the vast, silent space. He looked around, but nothing had changed. The world around him remained the same, endless, quiet, and full of mystery. For a moment, Kafka simply stood there, letting the quiet seep into his bones, letting the weight of his thoughts settle. And then, in the distance, a soft sound reached his ears. A melody, faint but persistent, drifting through the air like a song from another time. Kafka felt the pull of the music, guiding him forward. He began walking toward it, his steps slow, each movement deliberate. As he walked, the air around him seemed to grow warmer, the mist swirling softly around his feet, and the faint glow of distant light beginning to brighten. The path he followed seemed to stretch on forever, winding through the endless expanse, until, at last, he reached a clearing, and in the center of the clearing stood a figure, a woman, this time standing tall, her features clearer now. Her eyes were bright, almost glowing, and there was a sense of peace about her, a stillness that filled the space. "You've come," she said softly, her voice like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. "You've crossed the threshold, and now you must see what lies ahead." Kafka stopped before her, his chest tight with questions, but the woman merely smiled, as though she knew exactly what he was thinking, knew exactly what he needed. "You've searched for the truth," she continued. "Hakining, and now you will find it. But remember, Kafka, The truth is not just something you see. It is something you must feel. It is not an answer, it is a journey. And this journey, her voice trailed off for a moment. And when it returned, it was softer, more gentle. Is your own. The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Kafka's mind raced. His heart felt as if it was beating in time with the melody that still floated in the air, drawing him deeper into the mystery. "I don't understand," Kafka murmured, his voice filled with confusion. "What am I supposed to do now?" The woman reached out, her hand hovering just above his. When she spoke again, her voice was both firm and tender. "You must follow the music. It will lead you to the heart of the story, to the truth you've been seeking. But remember, this path is yours to walk, and what you find here will stay with you forever." With those words, the woman faded into the mist, her presence lingering only in the sound of the music. Kafka stood alone once more, the melody beckoning him forward. Part 7. The heart of the story. The music was growing louder now, its soft, melodic notes reverberating through the air, pulling Kafka forward with each step he took. It wasn't a song he recognized, but it felt so familiar, like a lullaby from a forgotten dream, something that had always been there, waiting for him to hear it. With every step, the world around him seemed to shift, the mist swirling around his legs like soft fingers, guiding him, leading him forward. Kafka's thoughts were a whirlwind, but they were slowing, the music quieting the noise in his mind. It was as if the song itself was clearing the fog that had clouded his judgment, leading him to a place where the answers were waiting. Just beyond his reach, the path before him was no longer a simple trail. It had transformed, becoming something else entirely. The trees were taller, their trunks more gnarled, and the air was filled with an almost tangible energy, as though the very atmosphere was alive. The light around him seemed to pulse, flickering with the rhythm of the music, as if the entire world was beating in time with the melody. In the distance, he saw a figure standing before a large stone archway, its shape vague and unclear, but the figure itself was unmistakable. The same woman he had encountered earlier. She was waiting for him, her eyes bright with an inner light, her hands gently outstretched toward him. Kafka's heart beat faster as he approached, the world around him growing still, the music becoming softer, more distant. He was close now, close to whatever this place held, close to the heart of the story that had drawn him here. When he finally reached the archway, he stopped just before it, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The woman smiled at him, her gaze full of quiet understanding. "You've come a long way, Kafka," she said. her voice gentle but firm. The path ahead is the last step of your journey. Beyond this arch lies the heart of the story, the place where everything will be revealed. Kafka took a deep breath, his hands trembling at his sides. The archway loomed before him, its surface covered in ancient carvings, each one etched deep into the stone, whispering secrets from a time long past. The air around it hummed with power, as though it held the very essence of the world itself. "What lies beyond?" Kafka asked, his voice barely a whisper. He couldn't see beyond the arch, but he could feel it, the pull, the urgency, the need to know. The woman's smile softened, and she nodded slowly. "The truth you seek is not a simple one," she said, her voice filled with a quiet sorrow. "It is a truth that must be embraced, no matter how painful it may be. But only by stepping through can you see it, and only then will you understand who you truly are." Kafka felt his heart race at the words. Who he truly was that what he had been searching for all this time? His own identity, the key to his past, his future, the meaning of his journey. Without another word, he stepped toward the arch, his body moving on its own accord, as though the path had already been set for him. The air around him thickened, the world narrowing as he passed through the stone archway. For a moment, everything was silent, a silence so complete it was almost suffocating. And then the world opened up before him. The space beyond the archway was vast, more vast than anything Kafka had ever seen. It was like standing at the edge of the universe itself, a place where time seemed to stretch and warp, where everything existed at once and yet nothing made sense. Before him, there was a giant pool of water, its surface shimmering with an eerie light, like a mirror to another world. In the distance, there was something else, a figure, a shadow, looming at the edge of the pool. Kafka's heart skipped a beat. It was him, a reflection, but not quite, a version of himself, standing in the darkness, waiting. He took a tentative step forward, his feet light on the ground, as if the very earth beneath him was shifting. With each step, the air seemed to thicken, the hum of the world growing louder. And then, as he approached the pool, he saw it, the image in the water. It was his face, but it was different, older, wiser, as though this version of Kafka had lived a lifetime beyond the one he knew. The figure in the distance turned, its eyes locking with Kafka's. There was no mistaking it. This was him. The same eyes, the same expression. But something was different. The figure smiled softly, almost knowingly. "So, "You've come," the figure said, its voice echoing in Kafka's mind. "It's time to see who you truly are." Kafka's heart raced. Was this the moment of revelation? Was this where he would finally understand his place in the story? What was this version of himself trying to tell him? And what truth had he uncovered by stepping through the arch? The reflection in the water smiled again, and the world around Kafka seemed to pause, holding its breath, the story he had come to seek. The answers he had been searching for were finally within reach, but the question remained: could he accept the truth that awaited him? Part 8. The truth revealed. Kafka stood before the pool, his breath shallow, his heart racing. The reflection of himself in the water stared back at him. But it wasn't him, not exactly. The figure in the water was older, wiser, and yet, somehow, still him. A version of himself that was not bound by time, not held by the constraints of the life he knew. It was as if the reflection held all the truths Kafka had yet to understand, all the things he had been searching for, but couldn't yet see. The figure smiled softly, its eyes glowing with an ancient knowledge, and the smile was warm, but there was something almost sad about it. As though the reflection knew the burden of the truth that awaited Kafka. "You've come far, Kafka," the figure said, its voice both familiar and strange, like a memory from another life. "But now, you must see." Kafka's hands clenched at his sides, his mind racing with questions, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come here, to this place between worlds, to uncover the truth. But what was it? What was the truth of this strange journey he had been on? "What is this place?" Kafka asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Why am I here? What do you want from me?" The figure in the water seemed to pause, its expression thoughtful, as though considering how to answer. Finally, it spoke again, its voice a calm, steady hum that resonated deep within Kafka. "This place is where all things are born, where all stories begin and end. It is where the past and future meet, where the moments that define you live, but only in the way that you choose to see them." Kafka's mind spun. The past and the future, his entire life, his journey. It was all contained here. Was this the truth he had been seeking? Was this what he had been meant to uncover? But there was still a part of him that felt lost. Still so many pieces that didn't fit together. The reflection smiled again, its expression filled with an almost knowing sadness. "You've always known the truth, Kafka," the figure said, "but you've been too afraid to see it. The truth is not something you can hold in your hand, not something you can define in simple terms. The truth is in your heart, in the choices you make, In the path you choose to walk, Kafka stared at the figure, his heart heavy with the weight of the words. Was this it? Had he been searching for answers outside himself when they had always been within him? Was the truth, after all, not something to be found, but something to be understood, to be embraced? The air around him seemed to hum with energy, as if the very essence of the world was alive. Alive with the power of understanding. He took a slow step forward, his feet moving of their own accord, until he was standing at the edge of the pool, just a few inches away from the reflection. The reflection looked back at him, and for the first time, Kafka felt the full weight of its gaze, not as something separate, but as a part of him, a reflection not of who he had been, but of who he could be, who he was meant to be. "What do you want me to do?" Kafka whispered, his voice barely audible, as though the answer was so close, so near, but still out of reach. The figure in the water took a step toward him, its form shimmering in the pool's light. "Live your truth, Kafka," it said softly. "Live the life that you have chosen. The world is full of stories, stories you can shape, stories you can create. But remember, it's not the truth you find that changes the world, it's the way you live with it." Kafka felt a wave of understanding wash over him, a sense of clarity that was both freeing and overwhelming. The truth wasn't something he had to search for. It had always been inside him. And now, in this moment, he had the power to choose how to live it for the first time in his life. Kafka understood the weight that had burdened him, the questions that had haunted him. All of it seemed to fall away, like leaves drifting on the wind. The past, the future, they no longer seemed to matter. What mattered was this moment, this choice, this path he was now free to walk. He turned away from the pool, his heart lighter than it had ever been, and began to walk back down the path. The music still played, faintly in the distance, but now it was no longer a call to action, no longer a pull. It was simply a song that accompanied him on his journey, a song that reminded him that he was alive and that the world was full of stories waiting to be lived. As he walked, he felt a sense of peace settle over him, the quiet comfort of knowing that the story was no longer something to uncover, but something to create, and in that creation, he would find his place in the world. Kafka smiled softly, the weight of his journey finally lifting. As he took the first step into the world, he would now shape it. Part 9. The Return. Kafka took one final look at the shimmering pool, its surface calm, reflecting the soft light of the world around him. The truth he had been seeking was no longer something distant, something he could never grasp. It was here, inside him, and the weight of it no longer pressed upon him. Instead, it had become a part of him, a quiet knowledge that whispered through his veins like a soft breeze. The path that led him back through the archway was different now. The mist that had once swirled around him was gone, and the trees that had seemed so imposing earlier now stood as quiet sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The world before him felt more grounded, more real, but it also felt as though it was full of potential, like a canvas waiting to be painted. With each step, Kafka's thoughts were calm. The frenzy of confusion he had once felt now quieted. He had no answers to all of the world's mysteries, no clear path laid out before him. But that was okay. The uncertainty had become something he could embrace, rather than something to fear. As he walked, the air around him felt lighter, almost like he was floating. The weight of the past, the pressure of seeking answers, had lifted, and the world seemed to open before him, welcoming him back. He made his way back to the place where he had first arrived, the small clearing where the archway had stood. But now, the arch was no longer there. The space where it had stood was empty, and the world beyond it, the world he had crossed into, felt like a dream, as though it had never existed at all. Kafka paused for a moment, looking around the familiar forest, the world around him returning to the quiet rhythm it had known before. He stood there, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of the silence, the peace that now filled him. The answers to his questions were no longer the key to his journey. What mattered now was how he lived, how he moved through this world, how he chose to shape the story that lay ahead. The journey had changed him. He was not the same person who had first walked into the house, who had stumbled across the strange book and the path that led him here. He was something new, something different, not because the world had changed, but because he had learned to see it with new eyes. And now, as the quiet sounds of the forest surrounded him, he could feel the pull of the world once more. But it was not a pull of obligation or of mystery. It was the pull of possibility. The future lay before him, and he knew that it was a world he could shape, a world where his choices mattered. Kafka turned away from the empty clearing and made his way back to the town. The small seaside town that had once seemed so foreign, so distant. But now, as he walked through its quiet streets, he felt as though it had always been a part of him, waiting for him to return. The shops that lined the streets, the people who passed him by, they all felt familiar, as though he had never truly left. And yet, everything was different. the light, the air, the rhythm of the world. It was all new. As he walked through the town, he passed by the hotel where he had first arrived. The owner, an older woman with a gentle smile, was standing at the doorway, her eyes following him. She looked at him as though she had been waiting for him to return, as though she had known all along that his journey was only beginning. Kafka stopped in front of her, his heart light. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. It was the smile of someone who had learned something valuable, something essential. "I'm back," he said softly. The woman's eyes softened, and she nodded, as if she had known all along. "You found what you needed," she said, her voice full of quiet warmth. Kafka nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. Yes, he had found what he needed, not the answers to every question, but the peace that comes with understanding that some things are not meant to be known, but simply lived. "I think," he said slowly, "I think I'm ready now. Ready to live my story." The woman smiled, her gaze steady and kind. "You are," she said, "and remember, the journey is never truly over. It's always unfolding, one step at a time." Kafka nodded again, feeling the final weight of his journey lift. He was ready to take the next step, to embrace the world in front of him with open arms, and to shape his own future. As he turned to leave, he felt the breeze gently tug at his hair. The world once again alive with possibility, and with each step he took, he knew that he was no longer seeking the truth. He was living it. Part 10. The final step. Kafka stood at the edge of the town. The gentle hum of the sea in the distance, the soft rustle of the trees in the breeze. The world around him was quiet, but it was not the quiet of emptiness. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when everything has settled, when the world is waiting. He felt lighter than he had ever felt before, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. But it was not a feeling of relief alone. It was the feeling of freedom, of knowing that the path ahead was his to choose, that the story was his to write. As he stood there, the soft breeze caressing his face, Kafka closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of the sea, the earth, the life around him. It was as though every breath was a reminder that he was here, in this moment, and that everything had led him to this place. He had crossed into a world of mystery, of dreams and stories. But now, he was back in the world of the living, but with a new perspective, a new understanding of who he was and who he could become. There would still be questions, still be mysteries that would unfold, but they no longer frightened him. They were just part of the journey, part of the story that was waiting to be told. Kafka opened his eyes, looking toward the horizon where the sea met the sky, a vast expanse stretching out before him. The world was full of possibility, and as he took the first step forward, he felt a sense of peace settle within him. The path before him was wide open, but it was not a straight path, and it was not always clear. There would be twists and turns, moments of doubt, and moments of certainty, but each step he took would be his, and each choice would be his to make. And as he walked through the town, passing the familiar streets and the people he had once only observed from afar, Kafka felt a sense of connection. He was not alone anymore, not in this world, not in this story. He was a part of everything: the town, the sea, the trees, the people who walked alongside him, all part of the same story, woven together by the choices they made. The woman who had greeted him in the hotel smiled at him again as he passed. She nodded, as though she, too, knew the journey he had just completed. Her eyes were full of warmth, but there was something else in them, something deeper, as though she understood more than she let on. Kafka smiled back, his heart full, and he kept walking. The music that had once guided him through the labyrinth of the unknown seemed to follow him now, but it was softer, gentler, a quiet melody that played in the background of his life. It was the song of his journey, the song of his choices, the song of the life he was beginning to live. He reached the edge of the town, the sea stretching out before him, a vast, endless horizon. He could hear the sound of the waves, feel the rhythm of the ocean as it lapped against the shore. For a moment, Kafka stood there, looking out at the expanse of water, the quiet majesty of it all. He could go anywhere now. He could choose any path, make any decision. The story was his to live, and the future was waiting. As he took one last breath, the wind catching the edges of his coat, he smiled to himself. The answers, the questions, the mysteries, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was living, being part of the story. What mattered was the journey itself, and the steps he would take along the way. Kafka turned and began to walk, the sound of the waves filling his ears, the soft, constant rhythm of the sea guiding him forward into the world that lay ahead. And with that, the journey continued, not an end, but a beginning.